Discuss. Well, he has a new show coming up. Jay is the host of Jay's Analysis, a website that handles analyzes, investigates current events, geopolitics, pop culture, movies, literature, and philosophy. Jay, how are you doing tonight?
Well, as always, Tim, thank you.
Oh, thanks for coming on again tonight to discuss this. You have a new show, Hollywood Esoterica. Is the working
Esoteric
title?
Hollywood.
Esoteric Hollywood. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, Hollywood. Why do these movies have these messages that you analyze on your website? What's the purpose of these messages? What examples do you have for esoteric messages in these movies?
Right. Well, first about the show. The show looks like it's going to start sometime in November, October, November. And what we're going to do is have Mike Adams of Natural News is starting a 24-hour radio network. So it's going to be continuous like you would hear XM or something like that, but it's just going to be online. So a lot of different shows on the network, everything from health, organic food, vaccines, to my stuff. So it's looking like maybe Adam Kokesh, Mike Adams will have a show, maybe Sean Stone, Jim Mars, a bunch of people that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. So a variety of stuff there. My angle will, of course, be Esoteric Hollywood. And what I intend to do is really just continue the work that I presently do, but in a more focused format where we will be talking a lot of film. So because that's 80 to 90% of the traffic to my site is the film reviews, that's probably a good way to get an angle into pop culture and, hopefully grow my audience. That's really what I'm after. So, as I've said before, I think maybe to you on the first interview that we did, the reason I got into this was when I was in undergrad and grad school, I've always grown up, we've all watched movies. We just live in the culture of Hollywood and entertainment, mass media. So we've all grown up in different eras watching movies. And being somebody who's artsy, more on the right brain side of things, I've always had an affinity for the arts. So originally, I wanted to do acting. I wanted to do stand-up comedy. That was what I planned to do all through high school and wrote a stand-up routine and so forth. Now, as I got older, though, my interests changed and I got into other things. So by the time of college and grad school, I was still interested in the arts, just kind of as a hobby. And I got deeper into philosophy, and the great thing about philosophy is that it ties a lot of things together. So you might be studying biology, you might be studying astronomy, you might be studying logic, literature, all of which are disparate, separate fields. But the great thing about philosophy is that you can have a philosophy of anything, pretty much. So you can have a philosophy of humor, a philosophy of literature, a philosophy of biology, blah, blah, blah. And by the time of grad school, I was doing lit and philosophy together, and I thought, this would actually be a pretty good topic for a hardcore website. I'd already been kind of doing some alternative media stuff, conspiracy articles, things like that, and that just developed into really hammering away at the film reviews just because that's where I started seeing the feedback. It's something I love to do. I love watching a movie, dissecting it, kind of playing movie detective, pulling it apart, doing what in literature we call a close reading. So if you've ever had any lit classes in college or university, kind of what I'm doing is what's called a close reading, where your professor and the class dissect, Shakespeare or whoever, whatever piece of literature, Dostoevsky, you're reading. So I apply that same method to film, but not just the university style close reading. It's also analytical. It brings in philosophy. It's also esoteric. It brings in, when it's appropriate, I think, elements of the mystical, the metaphysical, the occult, whatever may be the case, depending on the film. It also looks at the angle of psychological warfare, psyops, mass conditioning, propaganda, advertising, marketing. These are all aspects of film. So the philosophy of film is very fascinating on top of all these questions and all these subjects. And that's really what fascinates me. So the ability of the director, of the studios, of the mass media, of the companies to kind of play the role of magician, if you will. If you think of the movie Hugo, which was Martin Scorsese's film based on the kids novel about a kid who basically, it's kind of a complicated plot, but the kid builds a robot kid in a way, if I recall. And Ben Kingsley plays an old school film director. And Scorsese's point in that film, in part, seems to be that the film director, in a way, has the role of a magician, but not a magician in the sense of Crowley per se or anything like that, but in the sense of theatrics. So if you think about a movie like The Prestige, the Christopher Nolan film with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale and Scarlett Johansson, The Prestige also presents this idea that theater, film, is the art of illusion. And so it's the art of giving people narratives, of giving people understanding, of giving people meaning. And that's so much more powerful, I think, as you and I have discussed in the past, than any kind of bureaucrat reading off a list of rules and laws. Nobody cares about that. That's boring. What people do care about are the arts, and that's what moves them, and that's what Plato said so long ago. So whether it's film, poetry, music, visual arts, whatever the medium, movies have a particular power, I believe, because they're a combination of all these arts. So you have the auditory, you have the visual, you have the ability to play with time through editing, in ways that other forms are somewhat limited. So if it's just music, you're limited to the time and the pacing and the tone and the notes and the different instruments. Not necessarily visual unless it's a visual arts performance with music. So there's just a lot more layers that you can put into a film. And as we all are aware, I'm quite sure, the beginning of Hollywood starts with propaganda. And if we think back to the Nazis, they were instrumental in developing certain camera techniques. And early on, the Germans and the Nazi Party were very invested in both Hollywood and the visual, theatrical scene of Europe. Then things change over time, especially in the U.S., where it shifts into different, what we might call mafia blocks. We'll get into all that later, I'm sure, as we, with kind of a Catholic mafia block involved in film and Hollywood, Italian mob involved in an aspect of Hollywood and filmmaking, and you've got Jewish mafia involved in aspects of Hollywood. And so there's kind of different cliques that appear in that whole scene as well. But back to the main point. So that's what I do. I like to look at these things, pull them apart. You could call me the movie Columbo. The movie man Columbo. My fate is apparently sealed now. I'm going to be movie guy, I guess, which hopefully that'll work out. I won't regret it 20 years from now. I'll be typecast as movie guy. But anyway, so if you think about recent big blockbusters, something like Interstellar, Christopher Nolan's film, that's kind of a treatise homage on 2001: Space Odyssey by Kubrick. That's a big one that I did that got a lot of hits, a lot of traction on that piece. And what I did was I just looked at different levels of what I think Nolan is trying to say there, and whether it's the metaphysical or whether it's esoteric occult stuff, whether it's philosophical points, even scientific or physics points, all of these things can be conveyed and are analyzed in an example of something like Interstellar. So if somebody's hearing this who hasn't, seen or experiencing the stuff I do, it's similar to Vigilant Citizen, but hopefully I try to give it a little more academic depth, a little more sophistication than your average watered down, all-seeing eye here, this equals Illuminati. That's pretty mindless in my view. But so that's what I do. I look at the threshold. One of the best classes I had in undergrad was Cold Hollywood History, and I had a professor who actually was quite a conspiracy theorist. He was a little more on the classic progressive side. He might be a fan of Webster Tarpley, but we did learn a lot of interesting things in that class. So we studied a whole lot of Oliver Stone films in depth, and we also read and looked at the historical accounts in comparison to the way they're presented in the films. And so different writers in a vein of, or at a school, or not a school, a branch of philosophy that's called semiotics, which is the study of signs and symbols, the philosophy of different signs and symbols. That branch of philosophy, relatively new, developed in the late 1800s and the 20th century. People like Charles Sanders Peirce, Michel Foucault, all of these people have important writings in the branch of philosophy known as semiotics. And this obviously ties into imagery, because if you think about it, words are, of course, images as well as pictures. So, I mean, in other words, the word itself is an image. We're looking at an image. It's an image of a word, but it's still an image. And the ability to play with word and with image is an art. And that's, of course, why we hail artists and filmmakers, film directors, and so forth. And that's really what semiotics does, is look at these different levels of reality and the playful aspects of language and images. So Umberto Eco, who is a well-known semiotician, Italian author, he's the author of Foucault's Pendulum, or The Name of the Rose. Those are two of his most famous works. Eco has done a lot of work also in Bondology. So there's this whole study of James Bond known as Bondology, and Eco has some famous pieces on that, where he looks at structure in Fleming's works and so forth. So I don't want to bore everybody with a lit lecture, but suffice to say that Eco has some really interesting theses on what he calls fictional worlds, where he talks about different psychological aspects to the creative mind, imagination, and the threshold between the fictional and the real.
Was he the critic who took Ian Fleming's work and gave it credibility?
Correct. Okay,
because other than it was kind of like schlock literature, but then pop.
Correct. Yeah, he's the first scholar to give it some attention. Yeah, yes. Okay. And his essay on Fleming is a famous literary essay. So if you come across in bookstores, and Eco's books are everywhere, and you see a collection of his essays on literature, that one will always be in there because it's well known. But he has other interesting lectures online too that you can watch, where he delves into what exactly are we talking about when we talk about fictional worlds and reality, and because there is some bridge there. Thus, you can therefore see the tie-in to psychological warfare and propaganda. That would obviously be very useful from the standpoint of social controllers, social engineers, in terms of persuading the public through both rhetoric and imagery to believe what you want them to believe. And if you can get them to believe fictional things, or to apply the fictional things to their lives in such a way that you know the way they're going to react, then it's quite clear that fiction, and thus all forms of fiction, be they theater, music, whatever, film, will have a tremendous impact. And so that's really where the rubber meets the road, is the effect that you can have on the mass mind through these different techniques and through the scientific process of the application of what we tend to think of as aesthetic, the arts. But there can actually be a scientific weaponized version of those things too. So that's what I look at and what I do.
And by the way, that's a fascinating and wonderful summation, because that's the importance of cinema and film and affecting the culture, how our consciousness, and how we view life. Obviously, the technology would determine the extent of control, and also the art form. I guess that's what the medium's the message. I guess, as what's his name said, the Canadian Marshall McLuhan.
Yes.
Yeah. And
David Lynch hints at that very point in Mulholland Drive, where he says, "No high bando, no high bando. There is no tape. There is no tape," and that's what he's kind of getting at there.
Mm-hmm. The art of illusion in movies. A good example would be of a movie changing how people behave would be a movie about a 25-foot great white shark that's eating you.
Oh yeah, Jaws is a classic, great point.
people literally being scared to literally go into the water, even though there's no reason to believe there's no increased threat than the year before. It scared people.
Yeah.
So that's a great example. I guess some insider could have shorted beachfront property that year and made a lot of money. If they knew what the.
Oh yeah, right. If you knew
Yeah.
Roy Schneider and Dustin Hoffman were going to be in a big hit called Jaws. Yeah.
So not Dustin Hoffman.
The
other guy who was in The Graduate, Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah.
He was in The Graduate too, by the way.
Right.
The other guy, yeah. And Robert Shaw. But it's funny. The effect of movies on people, and it's never just the movie. When people say it's just a movie, it's never just a movie. Just like it's not just a song. And the music, movies, these things change our mood, our attitudes, how we look at things. So therefore, obviously, it's going to be an effective tool of social control.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not just film. Film seems to have a more direct power in that way, though, because it's an immediate presentation. It's a constantly moving image. Remember the first time I read, when I read The Name of the Rose by Echo, it had an impact on me back in my early 20s. When I read City of God by Augustine, that had a powerful, that wasn't really fiction, but it's still, Crime and Punishment really moved me. That was a powerful book that I read that I remember really impacted me back in my mid-20s. So fiction has that power, and that's obviously known to those in power. But the moving image, the moving picture, has a special magical power insofar as its ability to directly present, as I said, multiple mediums of art in one. I think is. I mean, I love film, so I'm not going to talk down film, but in a way, it's a kind of sensory overload in the sense of, you might have 200 years ago gone to the opera and seen people singing, acting, and heard live music, but it wouldn't have been edited. You wouldn't have the ability to play with time in the way that you can with cinema.
Oh, just camera angles.
All kinds of things like that.
I mean, just look at camera angles, and
then with the rise of special effects and the special effects industry and how sophisticated that gets in tandem with CGI developed by the Pentagon and things like that, it just becomes its own. It takes a life of its own. It becomes its own thing. We all know about 2001: A Space Odyssey, and whatever one thinks of Kubrick and the moon and all that, what we do know is that Kubrick worked with NASA. Then the CIA was interested in Kubrick's abilities and techniques, and the Air Force, as I understand, was interested too, because he was creating these, really amazing fictitious pictures of spaceships and people floating around, and they realized the power of that. On the celluloid screen, to give Americans a certain impression during the Cold War. So that is just one example among many. And of course, when Star Wars comes along, this is it breaks ground in a whole new way with industrial light and magic in terms of the ability to use trickery through special effects to, it's really quite amazing. I mean, I know that that's pretty obvious, but if you stop and think about it, we just think about Hollywood and what all they can do, and the amazing talent and ability that goes into the special effects behind these films. It's phenomenal.
And it's the high art of illusion.
It is. And by the way, that's what's going to tie into a lot of the psyops.
Yeah, because, I think you're answering the question. I was going to ask you that why are intelligence agencies or military intelligence agencies concerned or interested in the cinema? I think you answered the question.
for many reasons. For one, as I'm sure you're aware, but for listeners that may not be, the arts have always been of interest to the oligarchs, to the elite, to the power class, because of the ability to use them. So when we think about patrons, we think about the billionaires, great families, whoever being patrons of the arts. Well, on one level, I'm sure they have an interest and a love in the arts, but on another level, the arts have an ability to a pragmatic purpose. So if you're the Oppenheimers, you're going to be patrons of the arts that will be beneficial to your designs in the world. If you're the Rockefellers, National Endowment for the Arts, et cetera, you're going to be patrons of artistic works that serve to meet the ends that you have for the social order, not necessarily for the love of arts themselves. And that's where we get into things like Frankfurt School, critical theory, modern art, abstract art, all that stuff. We all know about that, I think, by now. Being weaponized, being a tool, a way to socially engineer people away from actual form, coherence, harmony, beauty, the older medieval concepts of what makes up, quote, good art.
This is why the Rockefeller, particularly the second generation, got into funding modern art,
right?
Abstract art. There isn't talk of the Rockefellers around the second decade of the 20th century did research with the radio waves, not the bandwidth, the megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the 440 versus the 330? I forget the number. But one they found that was more disturbing, one that was more harmonious to the human biology, and they decided to choose the one that was more disturbing.
Yes, if you watch that film, I believe is it Anthony Hopkins where he plays Hitchcock, and there's an interesting scene where Hitchcock is at the premiere of Psycho, and they're doing different. If I recall, it's been some years since I saw this, 2 or 3. They're doing test audiences for Psycho, and he's trying out different techniques and watching the audience. All he cares about is the reaction of the audience. So when Janet Leigh's in the shower and that whole scene goes down and everyone just freaks out, that seals the deal for him, and the studios love it, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, we all know what comes out of that, Psycho. So that is a window into not just the desire on the part of studios to shock the audiences and get a reaction, which creates a buzz and makes money. If you're coming from the perspective of psyops, psychological warfare, and you're watching that would be of tremendous use to you. And that's why, all the way back to the beginning of the camera, there was foresight that's what this could be used for. So the Nazis would use it for propaganda films. There were people in the South that use it. We all know about what's the classic KKK propaganda?
Birth of Nation.
Birth of a Nation. That's a classic one. Yeah. And then we think about Howard Hughes and his CIA connections, as I've talked about in the past, and all the movies that he shot back in the day, 20s and 30s, Hell's Angels, things like that. Those were all quite obviously and openly war propaganda films. So that's what all you see in the up into the 40s and 50s is war films. They're just that's everything. And then of course pro-American cowboy films and things like that. So that's the psyop angle of this, is that it operates on many levels. Theater has always been the purview of people what does a spy do? A spy acts. And actors are playing another role. They're playing a different persona. And that's essentially what a lot of people who, do undercover operations do. And as well as, trafficking in secrets. That's what esoteric writers, the occult, cults, we've touched on this in the past. That's what they do. They traffic in secrets. One of those secrets is the art of illusion and trickery that Machiavelli and Sun Tzu talked about, the ability to convince the enemy or your own people, your own troops. You see, psyops is not just for the enemy. It's also important for morale amongst your own troops, which is why, as I've said, Machiavelli says even if you're a king and you've got a bunch of troops and morale's low, have a vision. tell them you had a vision last night and the gods told you that, you're going to be victorious tomorrow. Well, that's going to raise morale amongst the troops. That's no different from what we see today in the propaganda aimed at our own troops, who must be convinced of the narratives of Western Atlantis, Imperium, and so forth. So that's how all of these things tie together, and that would be the use for intelligence agencies, is the ability to, again, many levels, to use the psyops, to use the trickery, to create a buzz through media stories that are fake, create distractions, leak something to damage an enemy. That's another way to do it, through media. Put something in a film that damages someone, conveys a message, real or perhaps disinformation. I mean, there's a million different ways, different techniques that these avenues might be useful. And of course, Frederick Forsyth just came out and said he was MI6. Well, that was pretty obvious. I mean, I could have told you that a long time ago. But he just said this the other day. Well, I was MI6 for 20 years. This is why so many writers, spies, and actors all sort of have the MO. Roald Dahl, Julia Child, the list is Ian Fleming. The list goes on and on. There's this curious parallel between theater, spycraft, esoterica, you name it. It's all very real in the real world. So that's why it's fascinating, and that's why it's useful for many reasons, for many purposes, as well as actors make good spies. Natalie Portman's grandmother was MI5 asset. A lot of people don't know that, but that's an interesting little tidbit. So, theater and spycraft go hand in hand.
That goes back to the beginning of the cinema and the stage, by the way.
The stage too, yeah.
I mean, there's questions regarding John Wilkes Booth and his connection. He was a spy actor, right?
Right.
There you go. Harry Houdini.
Oh yes, I have only recently learned that within the last couple of years. I did not know that. Right.
And of course, then there was that guy John Mulholland, who was that magician who was hired by the CIA in the 50s to teach agents sleight of hand and all that. But it all goes back to it's conjuring and trickery, and
exactly.
Goes back to John Dee. So it's a lineage that goes way back.
In Moonraker, the novel, M sends Bond. Well, actually, it had happened before, but it comes up in Moonraker because the way that M's going to get Bond to infiltrate and spy on Hugo Drax is through card playing. So Bond has to brush up on all these card tricks because they believe that Hugo Drax is cheating at cards, and so they want Bond to cheat with him and figure out what's going on. And that's why card playing comes into Fleming and the Bond novels, is quite literally because it is trickery and sleight of hand, and that's what spies like and do. And
you talk about Hollywood and actors and intelligence world, because within Hollywood you get the intersection between intelligence, entertainment, and organized crime. And I guess the personification that would be one Frank Sinatra.
I talked to a guy who knew a lot more about this than I do. I know sort of a cursory history of Rat Pack, Sinatra, and all those kinds of escapades. I don't know how much of what I know is actually true, but yeah, you heard all kinds of crazy stories like that. And I mean, quite obviously he was involved, with the mafia and all that.
Well, I mean, the whole story with the Godfather. Apparently, it was he was the singer in the Godfather. That's supposed to be Frank Sinatra, and it's From Here to Eternity. And who was the band leader? Was it Tommy Dorsey?
I haven't watched it since we did that interview.
But I'm saying in real life, it might have been Tommy Dorsey that was the real.
No, I think you're right though, because when I was reading about it, that sounds right.
But he went to Las Vegas. Didn't he also serve as a frontman for a bunch of mafiosos in a casino there?
So I've heard, yes.
Yeah, and of course he produced the Manchurian Candidate, right? He was one of the producers.
He is, and he plays a central role in the film as well.
Yeah, you ever thought it was odd that Lawrence Harvey played the would-be assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald?
Oh wow, I didn't even think about that.
Lawrence Harvey.
But if you look at the fact that Frankenheimer's novel came out before the movie and before anyone knew about that program.
Yes.
That's what's very telling, I think.
Mm-hmm. And that's it is telling because the movie, because MK Ultra was not known yet.
It wasn't.
And, of course, the story about MK Ultra was that it was a reaction to the Korean War. Of course, in reality, they were planning before the Korean War, but
right.
We know that. But that is fun. Yeah, you're right. The movie portrays it as something going. So obviously, Condon had sources or information.
I'm sorry, Frankenheimer's the director. Richard Condon wrote the novel.
Condon.
Excuse me, right.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Condon had to have known, what was actually going on. That's one of the great classic examples of, I guess, what we could loosely call predictive programming, right?
And this is a little off track, but I believe the night that Robert F. Kennedy was shot in the Ambassador Hotel, he had dinner with John Frankenheimer, and I believe with what's her name, the actress Sharon Tate.
Interesting. He was also a big fan of the Bond novels too.
Mm-hmm. So that he was shot sometime after midnight, but that evening before before he went to the Ambassador Hotel to celebrate his victory, he was having dinner with John Frankenheimer and Sharon Tate, and I'm going to guess, but I think Polanski was there, but I'm not sure about that.
Also, was it his dad that was ambassador to England?
Who?
It's Kennedy. There's some connection between.
Oh yeah. Joe Kennedy was ambassador in 1940, just before America entered the war.
To England, right?
To England, yes. To the UK.
So there's a direct British intelligence connection.
Yeah,
there.
It is. But he. So this is an interesting side note there. But being the Hollywood intelligence mafia nexus there is fascinating.
Oh, it is.
And with getting some of these, if you get the background of some of these actors, Cary Grant was a courier.
No, that's new to me.
Yeah, I heard that. I think that's mentioned in that movie from 9/11 to JFK. It's all bankers conspiracy or something. But I've read that in other places. These things you can't confirm. You hear it. You
hear it, right? Yeah, like the Candy. I think there's probably something to the Candy Jones story.
Yeah.
But it's hard to confirm those things. But yeah, this stuff's everywhere.
And if you think about it, they would make reliable couriers because they're celebrities. They can travel. They don't get the same scrutiny.
Yeah, they get access to places normally you wouldn't. Right.
So again, this is the part where Hollywood intersects, with intelligence, with illusion, and Psy-war. And if you can broadly look at, you can probably look at entertainment or advertising movies as a form of psychological warfare, because it's a medium that's meant to alter your mood or your behavior in some way.
Absolutely.
So, broadly speaking, we can call that mind control or Psy-war, and these things have a sliding scale.
They do, yeah. Now, a recent example of what you just talked about was the second season of True Detective, because it tied in money laundering, Hollywood.
I'm only up to see episode 3, so don't spoil it.
I won't spoil it for you, but it ties in Hollywood, local corruption, federal government, local government corruption, mafia, land deals, boondoggles, gangs, drugs, the whole gamut. It's all there.
And of course, with Hollywood, you also have which I learned when I was reading Dave McGowan is that Lookout Mountain in Laurel Canyon, which was a state-of-the-art movie studio that was run.
I forget who it was. Somebody recently made the point that on some podcast I don't even recall. I don't mean to not give credit, but it all runs together. They said something to the effect that California is basically just a military-industrial complex state, and like the whole state is just that. So
I've heard that too. Yeah.
So that you've got all of that together, and as well as Bohemian Grove. I mean, it's all there. So
and according to McGowan, you have people like Marilyn Monroe, John Wayne, Henry Fonda did work up there. He's never in any of their biographies never told what they did up there.
I was about to mention Monroe because I've read different pieces that argue that she was very, very controlled. Her life was very controlled, almost like she had a handler at all times, and she couldn't do this. She was under kind of house arrest, so she was just kind of owned in much the same way that people said about Judy Garland. They said that she was that the studio kept her drugged and she was kind of on house arrest. So, you know, in that regard, studios, agents, right, kind of handling the property in the same way as handlers might handle their assets. But, you know, I'm speculating there, but yeah, there's just so many examples of these things coming out. And there was that Philip Rizzo, his book about CIA, Hollywood, and drugs, that he was talking about different directors that were involved in intelligence work. I highlighted too, and a lot of times where it gets really weird and out there is where the films themselves will, it seems to me, reveal things about even people in those films. So, for example, Jennifer Garner plays the CIA recruit in Alias, the J.J. Abrams show. And then a few years later, she's literally working for the CIA in propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
That's just curious to me. I mean, that's just crazy. You know, so, you know, make of that what you will. You know, Ben Affleck says CIA's full of Hollywood. I found a clip of Bruce Willis saying much the same thing. There's a clip where I think it was before the movie Red, where Bruce Willis plays a former spy with Helen Mirren. It might be Red or part 2 of the film. But there's an interview where he says, you know, something to the effect of, you know, Hollywood's full of spies. So he compares their what they do as being very similar. The actor and the spy. And we can't forget the clips of Melissa Mele talking with Angelina Jolie after Salt. So Salt is the film where Angelina Jolie is kind of playing this back and forth double agent between the U.S. and the Russian Federation. And she underwent actual CIA training for the film role. My guess would be that it's not just for the film role.
Yeah. And you have some of the more, I guess, lurid accusations or strange accusations. You've Bryce Taylor's book, Thanks for the Memories, where she claims she was a mind controlled, I guess you could say, like a monarch sex slave. And
yeah, it's always hard to know with the people that make that claim because
we don't know.
Yeah.
She claims it was Bob Hope.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that, I understand why people are skeptical about it. I'm not poo-pooing that. That's just her claim, and then without any confirmation, where do you go with that? And how would you confirm something like that? Now, I think a lot of people's opposition to this is all part of that illusion. Most people think they know Bob Hope because they saw him on television.
Yeah, yeah.
But we don't know Bob Hope. We don't know who Cary Grant was. These are just characters they play.
Yeah.
But people do think they know them. That's how the power of illusion. Now, I think Walter Bauert, who wrote Operation Mind Control, he claims that he saw her with Bob Hope at parties. Mm-hmm. So he says they were they were next to each other at parties, and he would lead them around. Remember what Bob Hope was? Bob Hope was a presenter.
Well, yeah, and working with the USO.
Yes.
And that's what Candy Jones said was the totality of her mind control work was working with the USO. So that's she was supposedly doing courier work.
Now, Bryce Taylor, she's the one that apparently she went through the windshield of a car, and that's when she broke her. I think her and that's what played out in that movie, The Long Kiss Goodbye, where she goes through the windshield.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That is a weird film that's pretty. Now, Shane Black writes that conspiracy, MK Ultra, mind control, assassin theme into pretty much every film he does.
Well, also the fact that they're planning a fake terrorist attack so they can boost the budget.
Right. And he wrote Iron Man 3, and Iron Man 3 is the one with Robert Downey Jr. kidnapped by the actor, the fake Bin Laden, the Mandarin character, Ben Kingsley.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we do have books like Operation Hollywood, where the DoD has a liaison office, and they approve scripts. Movies.
Now everybody says that, but I always make the point that I think it's a lot. There's not just a liaison office, because that suggests that was just this every now and then request back and forth between these two groups of, can we use your tanks, or can we do this? Well, okay, if only if you put it in the right light. No, it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of these people, I believe, actually are. See, I mean, that's what Ben Affleck says on that Guardian interview. He says, there's a lot of CIA in Hollywood. What can I say?
Yeah, it's the same with when you have this character Chase Brandon with the CIA.
Yeah, Milt Bearden, right? Both of them, yeah.
Yeah, and they consult and they meet with, and of course his character was in Wag the Dog was Conrad Bean.
Correct.
And it's supposed to be based on Chase Brandon. And of course, the character in that movie is far more than a liaison officer. I mean, he's a political fixer.
That's exactly what, right.
with the power to kill in that movie. And you ever notice in that movie that, I don't know, you probably noticed it, is, of course, the beginning. Of course, the movie came out in the fall of 1997, if I recall.
That sounds right. No,
and, of course, the storyline is the president, getting in sexual trouble with like a Girl Scout type girl,
right.
Who, and as the beginning of that movie, he's entering the White House in the middle of the night, and he passes a photograph that's just like the photograph that would come out several months later between Bill and Monica.
Yep.
With the beret, and I don't know it's not hard to exaggerate. It's difficult to exaggerate the importance of that.
Well, this is one of those examples.
Because what does that suggest to you?
This is one of those examples of what I was talking about, where it's not just a real world spy story put into fiction like Ian Fleming. It's a real world person in the spy world put into a film that's then intended to release some form of deep level propaganda that's intended to affect the audience on another level. I mean, it gets really meta, you know. It's in this weird way.
But I mean, what that suggests to me is whoever's people who are behind that movie. I mean, it's not hard to imagine Bill Clinton came into office as a known philanderer. Okay, so it's not hard to predict that he may get in trouble at some point in his presidency.
Right.
But to predict it in such detail.
Well, that's where it gets to the difficult point that people have a hard time believing. I don't, because my suspicion is the whole thing might have been scripted. That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly covered up what was going down in Mena, Arkansas, right? Yeah. I mean, to talk about the president's sex life, people aren't talking about other things.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, the sex is always a great distraction.
And so
the tabloidy stuff, and I've noticed too that there's a curious connection in terms of tabloids and classical intelligence work, particularly with British intelligence. So the tabloid thing is an older school British thing. You know, the tabloids is kind of I guess ultimately it's an older European thing, because there were tabloids even back during the French Revolution, where they would have tabloidy stuff in the salons about Marie Antoinette. So it's an older European thing, but it's very much intimately bound up in UK media. And that this is hinted at in various films too, messages being relayed through tabloids, things like this. Stuff we think about as fictional spy stuff that I think is actually pretty real. So, I'm not sure where to take that, but you could see why it would be useful, because what is tabloids? Well, it's the land of rumors and gossip. And what is one aspect of intelligence stuff? Rumors intelligence. So to have the latest dirt is crucial. And thus you could see how both perhaps mafia and or intelligence agencies would have a use for tabloids. Mm-hmm. And that tabloids ties directly into Hollywood as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, it's a form of intelligence and also manipulation of the public's perception.
Yeah, working on different levels, right?
Yeah. Hollywood is the land of illusion, fantasy, make believe, and also, it's through the movies we tend to judge our own lives, that assess our own lives. The movie stars we see, they're bigger than life because they're on the big screen and all that. So it's going to affect how we live and how we think we should be living. But the idea of Hollywood techniques, you say that actors make good intelligence agents, because they more or less are trained in adopting multiple or dual personalities to fit a certain role. And so there's some connection there, of course. But I've heard you talk recently regarding some with the news, the mainstream news media, and how they may be mimicking or following some of Hollywood's techniques in reporting or, say, manufacturing the news. You want to get into that?
Yes. So I was trying to turn off the annoying Skype notifications. I hate that, and I've tried, I don't know how many times to turn that stupid thing off. Well, so the tie-in with mass media is that, as Patrick pointed out Sunday on the Sunday Wire, and if you spend much time in alternative media or whatever, over time you start to notice that a lot of times these people that are presented aren't who you thought they were. So it's relatively common, as he noted, in journalism, mainstream journalism, media, for people to have fake names and stage names, just like actors. And there are multiple reasons for that. Liabilities, people want to have a private life, blah, blah, blah. But it also provides a way for there to be more deception. So if you're presented as news reporter Storm Johnson with the evening news, right? It might be easier to get away with stuff if people don't know that hey, that's Max Smith from down the road. So that's one aspect to it, to where you have false identities in local mainstream news, etc. These people aren't necessarily who they're presented as either. So you just can't go on the assumption that you know who these people are that are on this pixelated screen in front of you that are telling you these facts about what's happening in Afghanistan or wherever. But it goes much deeper than that. The news itself is under no obligations to report or tell anything true. Now, I have a relative who worked for a long time. This is an example, an analogy for that, in editing for one of the largest publishers in the U.S. And Harcourt Brace did, for a long time, medical journals. And my relative edited science journals for about 17 years. And if you look up the history of that corporation, you realize that they are a private corporation, a mega book publishing conglomerate. Reed Elsevier, I think, bought them out. They own SeaWorld, things like that. Is there any obligation for a private book conglomerate to print peer-reviewed studies that are accurate?
Any legal obligation?
Yes.
I'm not a lawyer, but I want to assume not.
As I understand, no. And okay. That's exactly right. So there's no obligation by a private company to print or make sure that peer-reviewed studies are necessarily accurate or correct. How would you do that anyway? You get these journals come in constantly, right? So you'd have to, how are you going to do this? Is Harcourt Brace going to send out an agent to every single lab? People who would be at the book company don't know how to go out to the lab and check whether these studies are accurate. No, they're interested in turning a profit through whatever means they make a profit through the publishing of these things. Now, that's an analogy. In the same way, news is under no obligation to tell you the truth. And we've seen this many times. I think you and I have discussed the legislation that's been passed even recently, which they already lied before, but now legislation has gone through the pipe that there is no legality to tell you the truth in the news, right? And they can openly practice propaganda and psychological warfare. So, which again, they already did before. But that's the point, is that when you see that presentation before you, it's crucial to understand that it's under no obligation to tell you truth. It is, in much the same way, it would be like Pepsi, right? If Pepsi did Pepsi News, well, Pepsi News is going to be news about Pepsi, and it's going to be pro-Pepsi, right? In the same way, any other big entity like that does the news, it's the exact same, right? So with that in mind, understand that it's advertising, it's marketing, it's pushing an idea, it's selling you products. You're the news consumer. And that's why it gradually takes on an entertainment persona. It becomes infotainment because that's much more, just on the level of ratings, that gets better ratings than someone dryly reporting facts about Afghanistan and eggs in China. No one cares. But it goes much deeper and darker than that because it's not just selling things. It's also selling ideas. It's also convincing you of a synthetic overlay of the world that you experience so that you can and will interpret it in a certain way that they desire. So you are given the narrative and the interpretation of what's happening with ISIS, what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening with Turkey, what's happening with Russia, Ukraine. Those sources are your arbiters, the gods of Olympus, to give you how to read these things. And so this is where semiotics comes into it. But
that's the way it is, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's like being in a college class with a professor up there, and this my experience I've used as an example many times. And the professor opens up Othello and immediately starts talking Marxism. What does Marxism have to do with Othello? Right? But he's going to give you the reading of Othello. You see, I have the enlightened key, and it's through Marx that I can show you the gender discrimination, the patriarchy, the bourgeois elite, blah, 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 right? And it's no different with media, mainstream news. It's giving you the reading. We will give you the reading of these events. Oh, you want to understand ISIS? You want to understand gas prices? You want to understand this or that? Let me give you the reading of this close literary reading of these events. So that's their whole function from the PSYOPs perspective, is to create narratives, to create stories. And some days the news is slow. Some days there's not news. So what do? Well, you create a story. And creating a story when you've got massive audiences of millions of people, that can be a very lucrative opportunity. So I think that when we want to look at incidents like Sandy Hook or Virginia or any of these fishy, bizarre events, just the weirdness, what makes a lot more sense is understanding it from that perspective. The different political agendas that can be tied to these events afterwards, the marketing of the local law enforcement to get tanks and bulletproof armor, and we got to have IUDs to fight all the ISIS in the shopping malls and the Krogers, and local police department's got to get Tommy guns. Right? We got to get a federal grant because of this shooting that we just had.
It's a commercial for first responders.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's a great point that Patrick Henningsen made, was that you can watch these press conferences afterwards, and they're advertisements for first responders, and
it's product placement.
Product placement. There you go. So that makes a lot more sense. Then comes the scholarship fund. Then comes the Obama appropriated millions of dollars for the right.
And again, if the case for media fakery, I think we've mentioned this before. I'm going to say it again because it's amazing to me that people can see this things and then go back to watching the news as if they can rely on it for anything. Because my point is, we should look at mainstream news now the same way we look at a movie. Oh,
exactly.
Look what they're showing us. CNN Gulf War, fake missile attacks filmed down in Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, if they can fake a missile attack
straight out of Wag the Dog,
Wag Dog, why can't they fake a shooting event? Jerry Bruckheimer, you mentioned this before, directing the Jessica Lynch.
Yes.
Story. He's a movie. There's that connection, right?
Might I add as well, James Cameron tapped to direct the NASA Mars mission. I'm kidding.
Well, Stanley Kubrick is no longer around.
Right, yeah. Stanley's gone. Who can we get? Well, James Cameron did that Avatar thing. Let's get
when they toppled Saddam Hussein's statue, that was all staged. Mm-hmm. Camera angles, make you think a big crowd. We have the recent story of Amber Lyon with CNN, saying that she went there to do a documentary on the Civil War in Bahrain.
What was Qatar and United Arab Emirates paid CNN for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This goes to your point. They're being paid. And then she was let go after she's since been a whistleblower.
Well, that's why airtime is so expensive.
Yeah.
Is because it has a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And where ISIS truly intended on, if the intention was truly to put an end to ISIS, there wouldn't have been months of airtime for ISIS.
Yes. Well, like I said, they're creating a brand. They did the same thing with Al Qaeda throughout the 90s.
Yes.
And I think Sybil Evans had a recent podcast about brand ISIS and brand Al Qaeda, and she compared all the news stories.
Yes.
Building them up, and literally you could just put in ISIS. You could put in ISIS where Al Qaeda was. They had billions of dollars. They're looking into bioweapons and nuclear technology, and it's the exact same thing. Building the stories.
Weren't there some clips going around about 4 years ago of Obama just rehashing Carter speeches? Like, I don't know how accurate it was, but I saw some clip about 4 years ago, and it was a comparison of two speeches, and it was Obama's just reading an old Carter speech.
Now, I mean, those skeptics out there, and members of the alternative media have done analysis on ISIS, and they pretty much, anyone who does their homework knows ISIS is a creation of Western intelligence. That's not really in dispute. Anyone who really does their homework on it. But if the media can create ISIS, right, which I do think that they're a phantom force. I mean, they exist to a certain extent. There's people on the ground creating mayhem, but much of the image is a creation of the media. It's a media working with the intelligence agencies and Hollywood to create this image of ISIS. Is it too far-fetched to say that they can go and maybe create an incident domestically for a political reason? I don't think it is.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
And I recently, I think I wrote a piece where I was arguing that you can see the similarities between the ISIS propaganda and their airtime and how it's treated in the mainstream media with the mass shootings.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember the videos of like terrorists running in slow motion through, like doing monkey bars, running through tires?
Yeah.
And I'm looking back and says, okay, why are they doing this? They're not doing anything like terrorist-like. It looked like
there was one of them that were rolling around, like they were laughing on the ground, rolling.
But not only that, is if you're watching, they'd be doing it in slow motion. So the news media, this is like Hollywood, right? I mean, this is like,
these people have to be sitting, in their control rooms, just cracking up.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you not, be dying laughing at this?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mentioned this on another show. I got to mention it to you too, because it's so appropriate. But in this film that's in the theaters now, American Ultra, with Jesse Eisenberg and Kristen Stewart, it actually features a segment about fake news. And so you have the CIA shut down this whole town because this Jesse Eisenberg's character, this pothead teen, has been activated as a MK Ultra programmed kid, blah, blah, blah. CIA shuts down this little town, and they create a completely fake news story as to what's going on in the town. And they say that it's an Ebola monkey disease outbreak. And so they have actors wearing hazmat suits walking around, like, holding things and inspecting things and bumping around, and there's, and then it shows the media coverage, and it's, authorities at the CDC have shut down the town of Lyman, Virginia, because of an outbreak of some sort of monkey/Ebola disease, right? So there's a movie that is MK Ultra. That's the whole point of that movie, openly, telling you that the news is fake.
And, people will watch that movie and think, oh, look, this is fiction, but it isn't fiction.
It also includes a mass shooting. The movie does. So, at the very time that there's an supposed actual mass shooting in Virginia, or I don't know if it's a mass shooting of 3 people, I guess, a big media event shooting. There's a big media event shooting in the theaters, is what I'm getting at, in this film.
Well, again, what we're dealing, if this is this is too far-fetched for people to accept, Operation Northwoods, the idea of having fake victims and real victims, but even fake victims, the idea of downing an airplane and claiming they're college students aboard. And presumably there'd be fake victims. There'd be loved ones, right?
There's one that not many people know about that I saw in my Fleming research, and the name escapes me off the top of my head. I could probably pull out a book and find it, but Fleming hatched up all kinds of fake things like this. This was part of what he did in PsyOps. He was a naval PsyOps officer. Mm-hmm. And he came up with this idea that to trick the Germans, what they would do is they got a dead German dude, and they laid him out on the beach with fake papers in his pocket, his breast pocket or something. So when the Germans came and found their soldier, they thought that they had found a dead soldier who had obtained the British plans, right? Mm-hmm. What was all disinfo. So that's one of many fake things that Fleming hatched. And of course we know, people who study World War II know about the inflatable tanks and things like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is warfare techniques that are then applied in mass media is what I think the origin of it is.
So have we reached the point where news is just, I guess, full simulacrum?
It is. It's nonstop commercials, mm-hmm. But don't think about it as commercials for Pepsi and Cadillacs. It's commercials for ideas.
Mm-hmm. And the motivation, one thing is, again, we mentioned the police state angle, is the idea of it's a product placement for, police, first responders, equipment. And there was an incident recently in the movie theater, the guy pulled out a hatchet.
Yes, in my neck of the woods. And it said he had a fake bomb. Who carries a fake bomb in a backpack and has a air gun, pellet gun, and a hatchet, and the only person who gets hit with a hatchet gets bruised.
It's bruised, okay.
The guy supposedly gets shot, and by the way, there's like 120 officers that show up.
Okay, so this tells you the bloated nature of the police station.
That's exactly right, yeah.
They don't have anything better to do, so all show up, start bumping into each other.
Right. So on a practical level, you need to justify this funding.
Yeah. You also, there's the mental health angle, which, we need mental health screening, and if you can have a few of the incidents and have a federal program for mental health screening and drug prescription, you're talking billions of dollars right there, eventually. I mean, we're talking downstream profits here. The Psy-War angle, I was talking to a woman the other day. She had her kid, this was a few months ago at school, and they had a lockdown drill. And the kid came home terrified. And I asked her kind of sarcastically, does your kid feel safe now? But the point is, the Psy-War angle, because they're preparing kids for this stuff, to be locked down, treated like prisoners.
Yeah, the drills can be PSYOPs too.
Yeah.
The actual running of the drill can be a PSYOP, is what I'm saying. So I think Columbine, Death Education, that's what that reminds me of.
Yeah. And so you have all this. Of course, the one thing that I think you alluded to this earlier is all the money that gets, when you have a situation down in Charleston or in San Diego, all the money that got poured in. With no explanation, by the way. Within days, there are tens of millions of dollars being sent down there, and where's it going? And there's no confirmation of who's spending and who the victims are and who should be getting what.
Yeah, it's like Bono being in charge of Africa Aid or whatever that. Yeah. And then who knows where this billions go, and supposedly it's like 5%, 2% actually goes to anybody in Africa.
So, I mean, if you get $30 million, I think, and going up the Sandy Hook, coupled with $50 million for a new school, if that's accurate. I hear, you hear these reports. I don't know if you're getting, good news, but I heard they're spending 7 times the normal rate to build this high-tech school, which, again, that could be just a form of a payoff or to
that could be a boondoggle that they say they're putting the money into and then just pass it on to the, payoff.
Yeah.
And by the way, I meant to mention, I didn't learn about this until a few years ago. A lot of studios and movies can be money laundering and money stashing places as well. They can be tax write-offs, so you wonder why a lot of movies are bad. Well, it may actually be because they didn't really care about the movie to begin with. They needed somewhere to stash a bunch of money, most of which actually didn't go to the movie. It was just put into that as as a way to put money in a.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That was with what was his name in Hollywood? The guy who did Cotton Club.
Mm-hmm.
The Cotton Club murders was involved in using cocaine money. And this somehow got linked into the Son of Sam murders.
Oh wow!
Because of the Roy Reardon. Reardon was his name. Was one of the involved in trying to. Bob Evans was the producer. Guy did The Godfather, Paramount.
Okay.
And of course, the whole story behind that and how they had to get the mafia's okay for that. That's in Gus Russo's book about Supermob with Sidney Korshak and the Jewish mafia in Hollywood and their ascendancy in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But Bob Evans was I think that was he was apparently addicted to cocaine himself, among other things. But one of the things he was involved. He needed money. Millions of dollars for production, and apparently he was accused of ripping off this one lady who was dealing cocaine. And one of the attractions was it's a good way to launder your drug money, just through the movies, because you can just spend it, and then the accounting is just usually horrible.
Yeah, I had a friend who has read a good bit on this, and I don't recall, but he was actually mentioning some of the older studio companies from the 80s that had these kind of weird things going on. Mm-hmm. And that when you wonder why, how come TriStar Pictures disappeared? Where did they go? I don't know if it's TriStar. I'm just giving an example of some movie conglomerate from the 80s that doesn't exist anymore. That it's that kind of stuff's going on.
Well, it's like the casinos in Las Vegas. The mafia and the intelligence agencies have used the casinos.
Right. And like Enron, sometimes things have an expiration date, so you just blow them out.
Yeah. You blow them out. Look at the savings and loans.
Exactly.
They were. If you read that book by Peter Bruton regarding the Texas savings and loans, this is the Bush family, the mafia, and the intelligence agencies, and they're just passing out bad loans. They're just stealing these institutions blind,
mm-hmm.
And then eventually they just blow them out, and they collapse, and then the taxpayer bails them out.
And you think, well, why would the company want to go under?
Yeah,
that's because that company wasn't what you thought it was. It was
Yeah. So, but the I mean, this isn't a new story. If you look at the entertainment in general, I mean, you have Orson Welles with the War of the Worlds, and that was just a radio
example,
just a radio production, and the effect that had on people's minds, and people took a lot of notice of that. Now, some people think it was done intentionally. Some people think it was just noticed afterwards. Needless to say that
Henry Clay, I believe, this involved maybe not Henry Clay. Clay Shaw. That's it.
Oh, Clay Shaw. That's the guy you mean from the JFK thing?
And I think he ties into, I could probably find that article.
He was in OSS during the war.
Yeah, but I think he ties it, he had some involvement in Wells's thing according to people who argue that it was an intentional psyop. Let me see if that's true. Let's see.
Was he the one who arrested Hermann Goering or some other Nazi? I forget. He did some interrogation.
Clay Shaw? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Might be mixing up names there.
I want to say that's the article I read. I think it was at Global Research years ago. I want to say that's what they were arguing. Let's see. Sorry, edit this out. Me being annoying here with.
But the media in general has been linked to the intelligence agencies. I mean, if we go back to the founding of CBS News, ABC, there was like William Perley and Sarnoff.
Yes, yeah, and I had only learned this recently.
And this brings in advertising, because old Ed Lansdale came from the world of advertising, and he was a big psyop guy.
Okay, it wasn't Shaw that I was thinking of. Now, Hadley Cantrell wrote the book on it, and that's it. Hadley Cantrell's book on the alien mythology is the tie-in to the Rockefellers. That's it.
Of course, Hollywood.
Psychology of Radio by Hadley Cantrell. Invasion from Mars, A Study in Psychology of Panic, Hadley Cantrell. Human Dimension, these are all his books.
And Hollywood picked up the UFO meme.
Exactly.
A decade and a half later.
Right.
With the whole media, I was recently, I did an interview a few months ago with a guy, David Wemhoff, wrote a book about Henry Luce. and the Time Life Empire.
Yes, I saw that. I haven't heard it yet. I was looking forward to it.
And his idea of Americanism, and his idea was their target was particularly the Catholic Church, using Americanism to weaken the Catholic Church. And then once you infiltrate the Catholic Church, you utilize its, because the Catholic Church is everywhere, and if you can infiltrate it, you can utilize it, and that's what the Americans did. And Henry Luce was CIA skull and bones. This goes back to the whole WASP elite, but through Time Life.
Which is interesting because that's actually the old supposed Alta Vendita plan.
Oh, okay.
The old Alta Vendita plan was not to destroy the papacy, but to infiltrate and co-opt.
Infiltrate it. But the Time Life Empire. That's what. It's Time Magazine. That's Life. It's Sports Illustrated. Mm-hmm. This is the projecting the image of not only the American Empire, but the good life of America. That's big houses, girls in swimsuits, sports, and this is projecting the image of what it means to be an American. And his idea was you take over the media, and that's what Henry Luce did.
Risky business. That's the presentation in the Tom Cruise film Risky Business is that.
Oh.
I didn't mean to get off topic. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to.
Okay.
That's what it made me think of that because Tom Cruise's character he's wanting to get into the elite Ivy school.
Yeah.
And they won't let him in. And the way he ends up getting in is that he runs a prostitution ring and blackmails, right? And
so he's tailor-made for the intelligence agency.
So yeah, he realizes that that's how you actually get ahead. It's not getting good grades, right?
Yeah,
not doing homework, making A's.
But the whole idea, again, a lot of people think when we broach the topic of media fakery and some of these events being staged, it's hard for people to accept because they're so used to watching news and thinking that it has something to do with reality,
and that they're under an obligation to tell the truth.
Yeah, and they're really not. In fact, you could argue that they have a fiduciary responsibility to mislead the public.
Yeah, because it's for number one, money and ratings.
Yeah,
truth is not necessarily going to make money.
But it's nothing. If you consider the whole Psy-War doctrine, this stuff has been studied and written about in the Pentagon. I think I have a quote here from William Casey in 1981 at a staff meeting. He said, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American people believe is false."
Yes.
Now, the source of that is Barbara Honegger. Mm-hmm. He said it in a staff meeting in February 1981. There you have it. I mean, I guess it's one of those statements that you don't know if it's true or not. I mean, according to Barbara, it's true. It could be apocryphal, but it's like if he didn't say it,
might as well be true.
Yeah, exactly. If he didn't say it, he thought it. Did you, by the way, catch Jim Corbett's thing on Alan Dulles today? He had that posted today.
No.
I recommend it. But it gets into the intelligence community. Alan Dulles himself and his brother, and I guess I'll just let you listen to it. The ending is particularly telling.
Yeah, so. and there's a lot of the tie into the Catholic world there too. You can find YouTube clips of the Dulleses with different priests giving lectures and opening up different homilies and during the Cold War and things like that. And that
was like that Cardinal Spellman, right?
Yes, that was during the period when not just Vatican II, but they were really ramping up the UN and trying to convince hardliners in the Vatican that they needed to be a part of World Council of Churches, the UN, and all that. Which, from the time of Pius XI, you still had Pius XII is where it starts to cave. He didn't totally cave, but Pius XI in the 20s still explicitly forbade Catholics to participate in World Council of Churches or the UN. Pius XII caves a little bit, but not totally. And then, of course, with John the 23rd and Paul VI, you have a complete acceptance of World Council churches and all that. So.
And that was the ecumenical movement. That was a Rockefeller project.
It's Rockefeller, and that's why the Dulleses are right there in the middle of that with Spellman and everything. Yeah.
But the whole idea, again, there's this book, Francis Saunders, The Cultural Cold War. Familiar with that? And this gets into
no.
This Congress of Culture Freedom, how the CIA went in and published all these these literary groups and magazines, and many of them were like left of center, but it was primarily in Europe. But I think it also had domestically too. So I think if you look at magazines like from Playboy to National Review, they have some tie to Ms. Magazine. They link back to the CIA.
Yes, right. Now I did know about that. Yeah.
Yeah. But the whole idea of this cyborg thing, because you have to explain why something is media fakery is possible and why it's feasible. We've explained before about Operation Mockingbird and how the media is infiltrated, controlled. Okay, how they have they could have a corporate or profit agenda here, involved in this as well. But the overall cyborg doctrine, the Pentagon has written a manual written by one Colonel Aquino, and he's the Temple of Set, devil worshiper Satanist, who also, by the way, wrote the manual for all chaplains in the Pentagon. But I think he wrote a document in 1980 about Psy-War.
Yes, I've read it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so basically it talks about, again, these tactics about, controlling people's...
Yeah, it even gets into electromagnetic warfare.
Yeah, psychotronic warfare, and this gets into bandwidth and what people are using and their little devices they have on them now, and to control their moods and all that. But the overall issue of mind control, again, if you don't think that the movies or music don't have an effect on your mind, is obviously music affects the mood. I mean, right? I mean, obviously we all remember making our date tape, the types of music you listen to if you went on a date, because you want to set a certain mood. Right. Movies will produce music certain moods. But same thing with movies. So this notion of this medium, whether it's radio, music, being able to change the way we think, isn't something that's out of left field. It's done every day. In fact, that's why so much money's poured into it, because they know they can do that.
Right.
So Hollywood. What should we make of Hollywood then? What does it represent to the nation?
Good question. It represents... I like David Lynch's characterization of it in what I read as the third part of his loosely what I call Hollywood trilogy. And the third part of that is called Inland Empire. And he calls it Inland Empire because it's its own little city-state in a way. So, we think about D.C. or Tel Aviv or Vatican City as their own special city-states. Lynch kind of artistically portrays it as its own city-state, its own inland empire. So, by that, I guess you could say that it functions as the arts arm of the oligarchy. So, unfortunately, the religious arm, we could look at the caving in of the Vatican at Vatican II and subsequent events as either the World Council of Churches and the UN and the Vatican, UNESCO, as kind of the religious, cultural side, the religious side of the pyramid for the oligarchs. You got the government side with DC, London. That's one side of the pyramid. And you've got the arts. The arts are an important part, and that would be Hollywood. So, there's a lot of people who don't know this, who think that that's where you go if you're creative. You want to get into the arts. You want to do what you love to do as a profession. That's everybody's dream, I think. And that's what most people think Hollywood or the arts or music industry, that's what they think that it is. That's not what it is. It's an arm of the establishment to engineer that aspect of life. So, in other words, in terms of what we call full spectrum dominance, think about William F. Engdahl or excellent articles at Global Research on full spectrum dominance that really spell that out. Part of full spectrum dominance is the arts, aesthetics. So, you're not just controlling banking. You're not just interested in warfare and government. You're interested in the arts. So that's what Hollywood represents.
And through the arts, through illusion, you can control people's minds, and that's, as you said, it's far more effective than any piece of legislation or bureaucratic edict.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, Jay?
And that's what Plato said long ago.
And of course, that's the whole idea of the allegory of the cave, I guess, right? They're watching
the shadows and phantoms.
The shadows on the wall, yeah. So, okay, well, Jay, I think we've had a productive talk tonight.
Yeah, it was great.
It's good. That's a fascinating topic. I wish you good luck with your new show. I think I listened to your I guess your prototype that you sent out, right? If you would.
Which one's that? What?
You didn't you do a one on True Detective season 1, season 2?
Oh yeah, that's just kind of playing around. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. The show will probably be similar to that, but
okay.
Yeah, that was just kind of toying with stuff. But yeah, that kind of stuff.
And I guess they can find your stuff at Jay's Analysis.
Absolutely, as always. And I want to tell people too, because this will be on my site. Listeners, readers, definitely avail yourself of Tim's podcast.
Thank you.
I've been through every one of them except for the Henry Luce one, and they are a treasure trove. So definitely check out Tim's podcast.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that one was particularly fascinating because it brought into question the whole idea of the American experiment.
Right.
Radical. Again, I actually got into some of you, but I'm glad I talked to you before I interviewed him. Because he touched on some similar things about libertarianism and radical individualism, things like that.
Oh, okay, cool.
So it was an interesting talk. So I had some background. I had some background reflections that I could apply to